Good evening, each of you. It's good to see you. Thanks for coming. My, how you were singing out. What a great experience to come together and everybody singing out like that. Thank you for opening your hearts. We're glad to have some guests among us. We're glad to see Gary and Eleanor with us. They're the Daniels, and along with Andre, my friend. Good to have them. They're from over at Madison Avenue Church. And Gerald, do you have a date tonight? Wow. Great granddaughter. Somebody said, turn around and look. Now I said, no, he'll be acting like a fool. Congratulations. How neat for you to get to hold her in worship. I'm happy. Thanks, young people, for bringing her, for the joy you give him and all of us in seeing that. That's great. Well, this morning I took a real risk. I thought, really, when I announced the title of the sermon for tonight, I thought there'd be comments that would come when I said just a penny's worth. I can pick out some of you that I kind of thought would say, well, aren't they all? But nobody said that, so good. Thank you. You're generous and kind. And I admit up front that this is not a sermon that's designed to be real deep. And the part you'll like best is it's not designed to be real long either. It's just a penny's worth. And the scriptures talk about pennies. Now, there's two words that are translated, and I always have to say, and you would know that anyway, but there are two Greek words that are used and often translated penny and in the scriptures, and they appear more times than you would think, probably, unless you start to look up for them. Quadrant, I think, is the way one of them would be pronounced in our English version, and lepta, L-E-P-T-A, is the other, and they are defined in several different ways in terms of the amount of value that's there. Now, we know a penny is not much ourselves. That's the lowest coin that we have, and that's really what the implication, if you get down to not the literal translation of what a lepta or the quadrant may mean, it's physically, but there is a message, there's a real meaning in it all the way through. And there's the meaning that we want to emphasize this evening. And in both of them, it really is just the lowest amount that you can try to describe is what that is. It's the lowest amount of money that you could refer to. Defining the amount as relates to, say, our own coinage is difficult. Find a lot of different people and different books that assign different amounts of value. Part of what I discovered in trying to define that is that a lot of that research is old, and consequently the escalation of value has changed, so that through appreciation or whatever words you want to use in regard to that, it might have been worth less numerically in 30 years or 50 years ago than it would be today. And if you're using an old book, then you don't get the same thing. So I found numbers that said that either one of those would be considered to be worth about 1/10 of a denarius. And I don't know how much a denarius would be worth today, but we can relate it to real life whenever we go back to the time of Jesus and realize that that was about the price of a day's work, probably a 10-hour day, and one denarius would be the amount that an individual would typically get for common labor during that time. A quadrant or two leptas are also defined as 2 mites, or 2/5 of a penny. Estimated value of that in terms of our own monetary system was found to be all the way from 1/8 of a cent to 1.5 cents. And today, it gets down to this. If somebody wanted to say you weren't worth much, maybe a son-in-law, they'd say he's not worth a penny. He's just not worth anything that is measurable. Some of the ways that word appears is in the teaching of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, for instance, whenever he talked about in chapter 5 of Matthew that if you've got a difficulty, some kind of disagreement with your brother, with your friend, your neighbor, try to resolve that with him and try to resolve it quickly, because he said if you do not resolve it on the way to, and I'll use a little liberty to say here, to the courthouse, so to speak, or to the hearing that's going to occur in regard to it, unless you resolve it before you get there, who knows? The judge may make you pay to the last penny, the last entity of penalty that you might have might be charged of you. So Jesus said, resolve those things quickly and take the initiative in resolving them if you can at all. In chapter 10, verse 29, Jesus said, 2 sparrows are sold for a penny, and yet not one of them falls to the ground without God's knowledge. That God is aware of everything. And whenever he's trying to figure out what would be something that would be, in the mind of most people, considered to be worth the least, he'd say, you can buy sparrows. You can get 2 sparrows for one of these little denominations of money that we're talking about. So sparrows were not considered to be worth very much. Another place, Luke chapter 12, verse 6, he said 2 small coins in regard to, I'm jumping Mark 12 and 42 is where the two coins are referred to as 2 mites in the widow's giving. And then in Luke chapter 12, verse 6, he said 2 sparrows are sold for 2 pennies. And in spite of that, he said, there's not one of them that falls to the ground, or not one of them that's forgotten by God. So if they're worth 2 pennies, that would indicate God pays attention to every small detail, but it doesn't say much about the value of sparrows. But some of us, you don't have to volunteer to say, I remember that, but some of you with me can remember when a penny would in fact buy something. Now, I heard the story about the little boy that was given a nickel, and he went to the store and he got for himself a soda, and he went to the counter, and the person said, I'm sorry, that costs more than a nickel. And so he put it back, and he went and got a candy bar and brought it and said, sorry, that sells for more than a nickel. He got a packet of crackers and peanut butter, and they said, same thing, son, that sells for more than a nickel. Finally, he said, well, just take the nickel and keep it. And they said, well, that's not right. And he said, well, it's not worth anything anyway. Pennies would be like that today. I can remember going to the store, and who all remembers a penny matchbox? You could buy a little, yeah, Gerald, you and I are contemporary. You could buy this little box of matches for a penny. And you could buy gum. That's what you paid for double bubble in those days. When you paid a penny for it. You get a handful of them for a dime and just mess up everything in the house with blowing bubbles and sticking it here and there, getting it on your face. But you could buy things like that. There was a little wax kind of container, small and kind of long, and inside it had a sweetened juice, kind of like we might have called Polypop, but not much. And you could bite that wax off and drink the juice, and if you didn't have double bubble, you could chew the wax. And you get that all for a penny, and it'll last you a half a day if you didn't get nauseated at it. It was a good deal. You could get a piece of candy, chewing gum. But look at this. You could buy a penny postage stamp, and it worked. Or a penny postcard, and send your messages on a penny postcard. The card and the stamp on it was all for a penny. But that's in the past, isn't it? So far in the past that it just isn't worth a penny anymore. And that expression means something to us. I'm told, I haven't researched this so closely that it would make a lot of difference to me as to which way it goes, but I'm told that it costs more than 1 cent to mint a penny. That the price of copper is such that the copper you use to mint a penny costs more than the penny is worth once you get it minted, besides all the peripheral cost that's involved in the process. You ever start wondering why they are talking about the fact that we may not have coins pretty soon? Not just the penny. In fact, pennies, I'm not going to ask you to confess, but I'll tell you that most people will not bend over to pick up a penny. Now, some of us can't bend over to pick up a suitcase, but some people would say, well, a penny's just not worth the effort. What can you do with it when you get it? In fact, I got this idea from reading something a fellow told about people who didn't want to do that, having seen a pile of pennies somewhere and everybody just walking by it out in the sidewalk or in the parking lot, and just 20 or 30 it looked like, and just everybody walked by, so nobody pay attention because it wasn't considered to be worth anything. In fact, if you've got pennies that collect in your pocket, your pocketbook, your purse, they're just kind of bothersome, aren't they? And they collect here and there. The bank doesn't want you to bring them in and let them roll them up. You roll them and maybe they'll take them, but they don't want to mess with them. Too cheap. What a sad thing that is for those of us who used to think that we had something when we had some pennies. People are glad to find a way to dispose of them. I think of that when I go over to Ming's with the group that goes there on Sunday for lunch. You don't know it, but there's something in Ming's that reminds me of Alabama. At the counter, if you'll look, maybe you've been there so many times you don't pay attention to that. There's a small plastic box there, and it's got mints in it, pepper mints. And you can donate money and take a mint. And people love to have that place to put pennies and other small coins and take those mints. The Civitan International Club has that as an international project. And Betty and I both were members of Civitan in Alabama, and I was governor of North Alabama 1 year. And so we were really involved in Civitan. And so the antenna just goes up like everything when you see not only that here's a way that people can dispose of these coins that they don't think are worth much, but when they're all accumulated, they get thousands of dollars through the year, and they're used in research to try to solve children's diseases at the University of Alabama and the research hospital that's there. So when you go to Ming's, take some money and put it in that box. It's not worth a penny to you, but it accumulates, and eventually with enough of them, there becomes something important of it. This Kenny Westmoreland wrote a devo for his friend and mine, Bill Goodpasture, about coins, and he said that he saw that pile of coins, and then he was visiting a friend not very long after that, and he saw around the man's property several places where there were just kind of piles of pennies, and he didn't know exactly why those piles of pennies had been allowed to accumulate like that. But finally he said to his friend, I think I see about 50 New Testaments here?" And his friend said, "I don't see any." "What do you mean?" And the fellow explained that recently he'd heard a man who came to his church. His name was Jack Honeycutt. Jack Honeycutt was someone who went to India often and had discovered that for 50 cents of American money, 50 pennies, a New Testament could be printed and taken into India, or could be printed in India in the Hindu language or the Telugu language, and make it possible for somebody probably with a Hindu or Muslim background, to have access to a New Testament. And he was appealing to people to save your change, apply it. And I've heard a gentleman named Charles Scott, who also started going to India back in 1960 along with Brother Bailey, one of the first ones, a Canadian, who first went into India to spread the gospel associated with the church. And Charles Scott got so excited about the idea of getting Bibles printed and taken into India, where the doors closed in lots of places, but the Bible still can get in. He came to the Leoma, Tennessee church where I preached, and there he told about that, and he inspired a gentleman there named Grooms. The fellow got so inspired, David Grooms, that he started going to other churches and making appeals. When every time they would let him talk, he made appeals asking people to give their money, their loose change for New Testaments in India, and he raised thousands and thousands of dollars. They're each just worth a penny. But when you use them correctly, when they're applied in the way that they can be, there is a lesson in this, and there is a point. I guess the first point ought to be that the Lord can use small things to do great things. We see it when Jesus took the 5 loaves and 2 fishes, don't you? Back when there was a crowd of 5,000 people, they had followed him after he preached the Sermon on the Mount. They're following him just wanting to be close and hear him some more. They may be wanting miracles for themselves or for their sick friends or family members. I'm not sure why, but he was really the man of the hour in the Palestinian area and in Galilee in particular in those days. And they followed him all day, and they wanted to hear, but Jesus knew they're tired and they're hungry. And he said to the disciples, "How can we prepare a meal for these people?" And one of the disciples said, "Lord, you couldn't, if you had enough money, what it would take, all the money it would take for a man that he could make in 2 years, you couldn't buy a bite full for each one of these people." And Jesus said, "What do we have?" And they looked and found that boy with 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And they brought that, and Jesus blessed it so that everybody ate, and 12 baskets of leftover was brought in. Sometimes we minimize what could be maximized by the Lord in terms of our talents, our opportunities, our own funds that we have available to give. We may think, well, that amounts to so little, that's not worth a penny. But you see, when it's given over to the Lord, it gets multiplied and magnified. We mentioned those 2 mites that Mark told us about in Mark chapter 12 earlier in the lesson. And Jesus went to the temple, and his disciples are nearby. But he's watching people give. And I often speak of the fact that in today's world, people would probably just quickly get offended if somebody watched what they're putting into the collection plate. If the elders went down the aisle and watched what you were giving each time. I know real sure if the preacher did that you'd say, that's not your affair. this is between me and the Lord. And it is. But here's this poor widow, and she might have been ashamed of what she had to give. I don't know what her attitude was exactly from my witnessing situation. I can't. But when Jesus saw her give 2 mites, that would be like that penny, he called the disciples' attention to it and said, look what she gave. And if she heard that, maybe she was mortified at first because she's thinking, it's not worth a penny. It's so little. Wish I had more. And Jesus said to them, she's really given more than all the rest, because they had plenty left over. They gave out of their abundance. They gave out of their expendable income, but she gave all that she had. And he counted it as a greater amount than, it seems like he means, than all the rest combined. Not worth a penny? Well, it's another matter when it gets contributed and turned over to the Lord. That's why in that account in 2 Corinthians chapter 8, we emphasized that recently when we were discussing the issue of our raising. We started out to raise $5,000 in a few weeks, above and beyond our normal giving, thinking, boy, that's a challenge. And we ended up giving $10,000 in the same period of time and still keeping our budget. And we had to discuss the question, can we do that? And the answer was, yes, we can. And finally, the answer was, yes, we did. But Paul writes in 2 Corinthians 8 about these people at the church in Macedonia, whom he admired so very much and was using as an example for the church in Corinth. He said, you started planning a year ago to help the needy saints in Judea. And he's saying that's commendable. That's good that you did. But he said, now you need to carry through. You need to do what you started a year ago to plan to do. It's not in the planning, it's not in the initial thought, it's in doing it. And you need to do that. But he said these people, out of their poverty, they gave abundantly. And he said beyond what we ever could have expected. In fact, he said we discouraged them because they needed it themselves, but they insisted and they gave first theirselves, and then they gave what they had unto us and to the will of the Lord. And they are the example. He concludes all of that in verse 12 by saying, if there be first a willing mind, it is acceptable unto God according to that a man hath, and not according to that he hath not. He's saying God's tabulating is based on the degree of sacrifice that's involved in the gift, not in the amount of the gift. And God's calculation may be altogether different than what men calculate, but when you sacrifice, though somebody, even yourself, may consider that ain't worth a penny, it is. Very much is. Because when it's given out of sacrifice and given to the Lord, he blesses it and does great things with it. Besides that, sometimes we might get to devaluing ourselves. Jesus asked the question in Matthew chapter 16, what will a man give in exchange for his soul? He prefaced that by saying, if any man will come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. But then he went on to say that the people who will try to save themselves will lose, and those that give themselves will win. And what will a man give in exchange for his soul? What is he profited if he gains the whole world, but he loses his own soul? If you put that on the scale, then the soul is weighing more than the whole world. He's saying one soul is worth more than all the material things of this whole world. And if I'm that soul, I know that I count enough that God would let Jesus die for me. I count enough that God loved me enough to sacrifice his son. When somebody wants to devalue me, I need to be able to know that I'm okay, because his value system is not what God's is. And he may consider, you're not worth a penny, but I know I am. I'm a son of God. I'm born again. I'm a son of the King, and I count for something. Don't think I'm not worth a penny. I refer to myself because I want us all to refer to selves. I want us not to lose heart. I want us not to sell ourselves short. I don't want us not to give up and give in. I don't want us not to think that we're not worth God's attention. We're worth more than sparrows, aren't we? And God blesses to watch each one of them. He's conscious of them and of their needs. Yes, we're worth something. We're worth more than the whole world. So we must recalculate, and we must understand that we are people who need never to let this world around us demoralize us, never let them intimidate us, and never let us have the same depreciated value system that they do when it comes to the proper appreciation for God, for his word, for the church, and for the work we do together in his name upon this earth. We're worth a whole bunch. In fact, this world that thinks it's controlling everything and that it is able to survive on its own, that denies Jesus, wouldn't, as the man said in December, wouldn't know what hit them if suddenly the positive effect and influence of the Christian world were sucked out of the world. If suddenly just vacuumed all the sermons and all the teachings from God's word and all the impact the church has, all the impact that Christianity has on young people and pointing them in the right direction, you remove that all at once, and I'll tell you for sure, this world isn't worth a plug nickel. It's not worth a penny. But we are, because we're God's own. Once Peter said, we were no people, but now we are God's own people. We are the priesthood of Jesus Christ upon this earth, and we count for a lot. So may we believe. And may we enrich our own spirit by standing up with humble pride to say we amount to a lot. And this world needs us, for we still are the salt of the earth. We're still the saving power, and they need us. If the salt has lost its saltiness, though, it is good for nothing but to be cast out and trodden under the foot of men. Our job is to keep the salt, keep the word, keep the impact coming, and never give up on ourselves, because God assures us over and over and over in his word. He never gives up. I'll never desert you. I'll never leave you. I'll never abandon you. You be faithful and I'll be with you, and I will help you, and you will have great success. We are worth more than a penny. Your soul is, and tonight if you're not right with God, we want you to know that he cares. And he wants you to be saved if you believe enough to repent of sin. Believe in Jesus, the Son of God. Repent of your sins, confess your faith, and be buried with him in baptism. He'll wash you clean. And that soul that's worth more than the whole world will be saved. If you're a part of the kingdom and you've erred and drifted, you forfeited a lot if you have. you're taking a terrible risk. Don't face judgment that way. Don't risk missing your true value. The grace of God will bring you back and bring you up and set you back on the plane where you need to be to face God in judgment. If you need to respond to the invitation of Jesus for any reason tonight, we'll be standing and singing and inviting you to come right now.